welcome to our inaugural episode of what we're going to call Three Beards in a Bible, because there are three beards, and we will probably have more than one Bible. We've got three up here now. But of what we're just going to get together and talk about things that are on our hearts, and we thought what better way to kick it off than talking about mentorship, because anything worth doing, especially spiritually, is worth doing. Sorry, chair gonna hold you. It's worth doing well, and so this came out of a Bible study that the three of us were in, and we got to talking about mentorship, and God has put just a desire for me to be a part of a men's group that men just are men, and to hold each other accountable, but also to build each other up. And the only way that happens is if we do just that, hold each other accountable when we need to, but also understand that some of us have been down roads that others haven't, and we are there for each other. So in order to do that, what better way to do that than to have the Bible as our roadmap? And through a lot of study, I've kind of narrowed it down to there are three characters in the Bible, if you want to call them characters, but we've narrowed it down to Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy are the three people that we look at as kind of role models for what we want to kind of model ourselves after in the mentoring role. So funny that we have three of us here. We've got Jared, who we're going to use as our elder statesman, partly because he's got the best beard, and he's going to be our Paul for this example. I'm going to take the role as Barnabas, and Jason on the end is going to be our Timothy. And that kind of goes with the role in our spiritual lives as well. Jared is a little bit further down the road than I am, and I'm a little bit further down the road than Jason is. But these roles can change in any given situation. So I'd like to just start with each of us kind of, introducing ourselves, what we're doing, and then we'll get into who our person in the Bible is. So, Jared, if you want to kick it off with Paul and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. It's really kind of ironic, I think. I'm actually physically the youngest one in the group by about 5 minutes, I think.
Small mark.
Not by a lot, and it looks maybe different. But I enjoy saying it. My mom grew up in a Christian home. She grew up Christian. I was literally in church before I was born. But I never really bought in. I knew all the Bible stories. I knew the Sunday school stories. I knew all the little felt board, and I'm dating myself when I tell you that. But I knew all the felt board stories, and David and Goliath and all that stuff. I had no idea where they landed on a timeline. I couldn't tell you if David was before Jesus or any of that stuff. I didn't know where they went in the Bible, but I knew, the stories. I knew how to act the part. I knew how to live my Saturday night and then put it aside and wake up and live my Sunday morning, and fairly effectively so that I could keep the two separate. But I just never understood why you Christian people wanted to live that Christian life. You know, I never understood why you wanted to give up all the fun things to be you stodgy, you know, boring, sad Christian people. It didn't make any sense to me. And nobody took the time to explain it. And I didn't take the time to ask. So, fault on me. But then, you know, I get to be about 35 years old. Some things happen in my life. It was not a rock bottom situation, but I got into a situation where I wanted to be the best man I could be for the situation I was in. And I got to looking at my life and I realized, hey, all the best men I know are the Christian men in the church I grew up in. And so it made sense to me. I'm like, hey, all right, I've known a lot of people, and the men I want to model my life after are these guys that I grew up around watching. And so that's when I stopped playing games with Jesus. I stopped negotiating. See, up to that point, it was always, hey, I'll give my life to you, but, you know, I'll give you my life, but I'm keeping this. Or I'll give you my life if you'll give me that. Or, you know, there's always some kind of a negotiation, some give and take, and that's just not how Jesus works. And so I never got anywhere. I was always just spinning my wheels. And so at 35 years old, I finally get into a situation where I'm like, all right, Jesus, I have made nothing of myself and I don't really have anything to offer, but if you still want it, here it is. No playing around, no negotiation, just it's all yours. Keep what you want, get rid of what you don't want, and make me who you want me to be and make me the best man for the situation that I can be. And one of the first things to go was the situation I wanted to be good for. And, you know, in most cases, that would have been enough right there for me to be like, all right, I'm done. I'm out. But I opened the door enough that Jesus stuck his foot in it. He was like, no, you're mine now. And we're gonna do some stuff. And, yeah, from then on, everything changed. I understood why the Christian would want the life that they want versus the life that I chased. And, you know, I tell people all the time, I never stopped doing anything I wanted to do. It's just that what I wanted to do changed radically. And from that day on, I've been sold out. And I have no problem being a sellout for Jesus. And I am one of those weird Jesus guys for like the next 6 months. You couldn't talk to me about anything. I couldn't watch a football game that I didn't wind up talking about Jesus. I couldn't work on the car. Now, before that, I couldn't work on the car that I wasn't cussing it. I mean, like, just nasty. I would make up bad words. I couldn't work on the car without talking about Jesus. I couldn't cook a meal without talking. I mean, nothing that I didn't somehow turn into a conversation about Jesus. I am sure that everybody I knew was sick and tired of me for 6 months to a year because everything had to be about Jesus. And that's just been my life ever since. I mean, I've kind of learned to back off a little bit with my conversations just because a lot of people did kind of stop talking to me some, but you know, it's I think people started going like, hey, we're gonna have dinner, but don't bring that guy. but yeah, I mean, it was a total, complete transformation. People knew me then that know me now who still haven't accepted Jesus, but they know that what's happened in me is not natural. So that's just kind of where I'm at. It's been a complete upheaval of who I used to be.
Very cool.
And I'll share some details later on, but I'm going to go all night if I keep going. So I'm going to pass it off to, I'm going to let Jason talk for a minute.
All right. You're up, Jason.
All right, so I'm Jason. I've been a believer for around a year and a half, so I'm very young in my faith. I grew up in the church, kind of like you, but it didn't take. I mean, I went because Mom made me, you know, and I remember the Bible stories, but they were just Bible stories. Like, I just thought they were, you know, kind of cartoons and things like that. And so the older I got, the smarter I thought I was. Thought I, you know, figured I could do everything on my own. I didn't need God, and the further I grew away from Him, the worse my life got until it finally just, kind of fell apart in my hands, and that I went back to God, and I kind of tried not to, I ended up with a buddy gave me a book called The Love Dare, and God's in it, and I thought, well, I'll do these little tasks in there, because every day is like a challenge to do.
It's like a 40-day challenge.
Yeah, and so I thought, well, I'll do the challenges, but anyways, God snuck into me and got a hold of me, and I kind of like you, I've been on fire ever since then, and so when I got approached after the men's group about this, I was like, oh yeah, for sure. Like I'm excited about it, and I'm excited because I want to learn from it, and I also want to be the Timothy where I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of trying to figure stuff out still, and I know that fits, like you said, it fits someone out there who has the same questions, the same concerns. How do you get to that next level, and the mentorship, and so I'm really looking at this as where I'm gonna learn from you guys on film, and share my vulnerable moments where I'm gonna ask something silly or explain it again. I don't get it. I've gone through the Bible one full time. I'm on my second pass, so I'm hungry for knowledge. I don't have it all yet, but I feel like my faith is strong though, and I just try to live my life for Jesus every day, and it keeps evolving what that looks like, and I'm excited for it to grow and get stronger, and that's about it.
So and that is part of the purpose of what we're doing here, is to answer questions. And a couple things I want to touch on is, one, it's not always going to be Barnabas, Paul, Timothy.
Right.
It's going to change, because I don't know everything. Ryan doesn't know everything. He is going to know. He's going to pick up on things that we have not seen before,
or haven't looked at it that way.
Yeah, he's going to pick up on it from a different angle. So you will see that there's going to be some dynamic movement in the roles. But the other side of it is, I don't want any of us to be afraid to ask a question because, well, I should know that already. Because there may be a lot of people out there who won't ask questions of the people at church, the people in leadership, or the people who are mentoring them. They won't ask them that question because they think, well, I should already know that. And they feel dumb because they don't. That may be a question that the majority of people won't ask because, well, I should know that already. And if nobody ever asks it, nobody's ever going to answer it. Right. Like I said in my story, I never understood major parts of the fact that Jesus transforms you, and that's what makes you a different person. It's not following rules, it's having a relationship. I never understood that because I never asked. Because I didn't ask that question, it took me 35 years to have an opportunity. Now, would I have accepted that if I'd asked it earlier? Maybe, maybe not. But it would have given me an earlier opportunity. So, yeah, we definitely need to not shy away from questions just because we feel like they're dumb.
Yeah, and something else you got me thinking on, though, is like we all have our different experiences, and so while God's transforming us, He's not totally deleting us and restarting. And so my experiences in my life, how they come into the faith, is going to be unique for me,
yes,
and for you, and so that's kind of the cool thing. So you could take someone who's maybe got the same amount of faith as me, but because of our walks in life, like we're going to be totally different people, and our message would probably be totally different. And that's the cool thing, I think, that as I talk to men who've been broken, I see the beauty of them being put back together, but they're still, the original person they were. They're just, like you said, their desires change, but their experiences are still there, and that's a really unique thing that, I think you need to really embrace that, is that it's okay that you came from a crooked past and you're walking where you are, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I just kind of want to add something real quick, because the night that we talked about sitting down and doing something like this, something like a podcast where, we get together and just talk about life. Jared and I started talking about it, and Jared brought up the idea, well, hey, why don't we add a third? And it was like the Holy Spirit just knocked us both in the forehead with Jason. I mean, immediately we were both of us looked at each other and we were like, Jason. So it's not a coincidence that the passage that we were studying that night was Philippians chapter 2, which talks about Christian humility. And if you just heard everything that Jason said, I mean, that's the angle that he comes across everything with, is just that humility that, I don't know everything, but I want to, and it's life experiences that we all go through, and it's that humility, that humbleness that we're looking for in this, because that's what makes life real, and that's what we're looking for in this. Mm-hmm. So I'll just talk real quick about like how I got to where I'm at. I was actually saved in like 1992. And I was on fire for a number of years, and then I went through a pretty humbling divorce, and my wife at the time worked for the church, so as you can imagine, there was a lot of church hurt there because she got the church. So that really threw a wrench in it for me, because she got the church, she got all that, and even the men in the church that I had grown close to, I kind of got the cold shoulder from everybody, and that turned me off in a big way. Did
that really mess with your faith? I mean,
well,
did you separate the church? It
didn't mess with my faith. Like, I still believed in God. I still believed, fundamentally. But the church hurt was there. And I walked away from church. Which, if you think about it, that's where Satan wants you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. He wants you on your own, thinking that you can do that. And unfortunately, I did that for probably the better part of 18 years. Before I got back into church. And it took, unfortunately, another divorce for me to, this time, I hate to admit this, but every time I got into my truck, it was like that was my sparring session with God. Because I was doing everything that I thought was right.
Right? Yeah.
Checking the boxes.
Yeah. And like I'm having my quiet time, I'm praying, I'm trying to do this with my soon-to-be ex-wife, to the point where she was like, don't give me any more scripture. This is between me and God. I'll have to deal with this. And so I'm getting in my truck just screaming at God, what do you want from me? I was going crazy. And it took for me to go to Big Bend, and on the south rim of Big Bend, it's pretty tall. And I'm literally sitting on the rim, looking down, I don't know, 1,500 feet, whatever it is. And I just scream and match with God. And I finally said, you know what, you win. I surrender. If this is what you have for my life, then I surrender. And I'm telling you, it was a palpable, physical weight that was immediately lifted off my shoulders. And you can't fake that. I mean, you can't, like, that's real. And I was there with a Christian men's group, and the guys were telling me, look, you just have to trust God. Because the Bible is very clear about divorce. God's not pro-divorce.
Yeah.
He's not. But God also gives us free will. And while I did not want the divorce, and God doesn't want divorce, He's not pro-divorce. My ex-wife wanted no part of the marriage, and there was nothing that I could do to make her a hold on. And God finally, when I surrendered, fully surrendered, I had this peace come upon me that I had never in my life felt. And not a year later, and I wasn't looking, not a year later, God blessed me with the most fantastic woman. I mean, and I wasn't looking, she wasn't looking. So, God is in it when you allow Him to be.
When was the Big Bend trip? Like, how long ago was that?
3 years.
Okay.
So, I had never lost my faith,
Right.
but I had lost my fellowship. And that's important. You need fellowship. You need Christian fellowship. So all right, so let's jump into Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy.
Yeah.
So give us the background on Paul.
Well, so before I jump into that, I'm gonna, because it is something Brian said, actually the night that this all kind of came to fruition. But he said that the reason that it is Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy is because there's three people that you want in your life.
Yep.
As you grow, you want a spiritual father.
Yep.
Who can pour into you, who can teach you, somebody who's ahead of you, who can bring you up. That's your Paul.
Yep.
You want a peer, someone who is a friend, someone who likes you but is not impressed by you.
That's your Barnabas.
Somebody who is not afraid to look you in the face and tell you you're wrong. And to check you into the boards if need be. Love on you, but to tell you you're wrong. And that's your Barnabas. And then someone that you're pouring into. So somebody that you can be bringing up as you learn, because that's what a disciple is. A disciple is a student teacher. It's someone that is advanced enough that they can teach someone else, but that is... But let's face it, none of us know all of it. One of my favorite pastors and podcasters I listen to says often, if God's the Pacific Ocean and my brain is the size of a Coke can, there's a lot that I'm not going to understand, right? So we're never going to understand all of God. But as we advance and learn, we need to be pouring our knowledge into somebody else. So you need a Paul, a Barnabas, and a Timothy. So that's the reason that we've landed on these three individuals from the Bible, because Barnabas was a traveling companion of Paul, and they
Early on.
in Scripture, early on, and in Scripture they have it out a few times, and it doesn't eventually cause a split, and then there is a reconciliation. They don't travel together anymore, but there is a reconciliation in Scripture later on. But so you can see the friendship and you can see some tension in it. And then of course Paul and Timothy. Paul calls Timothy his spiritual son. So that's the reason for the relationship connections. So Paul, who originally was Saul of Tarsus, he was the guy who was chasing down followers of the way. That was the early name for Christians. The term Christian was actually a derogatory term when it was first coined. Christian literally means little Christ. And so it was a term used as a derogatory. Early on, the followers of Jesus were known as the way. And Saul was hunting them and killing them for the... He was a Pharisee, and he was hunting them for what was the body that was the governing body?
Sanhedrin.
Sanhedrin. Thank you.
So look at this.
Losing my words, and that's why I got a group with me. But Paul's resume is he gives this resume in Philippians chapter 3. But he points out that he is a Jew. He is a Jew of the circumcision, circumcised on the 8th day, which means he was born Jewish. He wasn't circumcised as an adult, and I'm not going to go into the details of circumcision. You can look that up on your own and explain that to your kids. Sorry, I should have warned you about that. But on the 8th day, which means he was born Jewish. He is of the tribe of Benjamin. This implied recognized, verifiable ancestry. It carried a social and religious credibility. Israel's first king, Saul, who I assume he is named after, was a Benjamite. Benjamin remained loyal to Judah and the Davidic line when the kingdom split. Jerusalem sat partly within Benjamin's tribal territory, and so being recognized as a Benjamite gave him an ancestral pedigree. He called himself Hebrew of Hebrews, which means he was raised in a Hebrew-speaking or Aramaic-speaking household. He had a strict upbringing, strong adherence to Jewish customs, so he was not a Hellenized or watered-down Jew. He was fully traditional, and he was a Pharisee. So Pharisees had strict Torah observance. They were detailed in their interpretation of the law, had a strong reputation for religious seriousness. They were respected even by their critics and enemies for their discipline and devotion. So he was like elite level religious. So Paul had a very strong resume. He grew up, he knew the Torah by memory. I mean, he was very highly recognized and very well known among the religious leaders. He was contracted. I don't know if he was part of the Sanhedrin, but he was at least contracted by the Sanhedrin to go hunt down the followers of the way. So he was connected. You know, if it was a mob thing, he was a made man. You know, he was also a Roman citizen, so he worked in different circles in that respect as well. So he was definitely, he definitely had a very high position for just a regular guy. And then he turns around later in that same chapter in Philippians and says, but I count all that as garbage. Or if you take the literal translation of the word that he uses there, it is animal feces. I count all that as animal droppings in relation to my relationship with Christ. And Paul spent the rest of his life after his conversion to Christ traveling, in prison, being shipwrecked, and then dying a martyr's death. He gave up wealth, position, power, influence to spend 3 years regaining the trust of the people he killed, and then being run around in countries and continents he didn't come from, in being guests in other people's homes, planting churches in cities that he didn't know, being run out of those cities, being jailed and beaten in those cities, then being imprisoned and taken to Rome. And like I said, he was shipwrecked 2-3 different times. There's the story about him being gathering wood and he was bitten by a viper. And the people of that island knew that snake. And they were like, he's going to swell up and die in a matter of minutes. And he just shook it off in the fire and went on about what he was doing, unaffected. Lived the rest of his life chased, impoverished, beaten, and imprisoned. And you can feel the joy dripping off the pages of his letters and even when he's correcting the churches that he planted, he still writes to them and loves on them while he's correcting. I mean, he goes from a terrorist and a murderer holding the coats while Stephen, the first martyr, is stoned to death, to loving and dying as a martyr himself. I mean, this guy is the absolute transformation story. This is, if there's anybody to model yourself after, I mean, for these guys to regard me as a Paul type character is absolutely humbling and something I cannot live up to at all. But it gives me a goal to shoot for. So I can't do him any justice, but that's the best I got.
Well, I mean, I'll use that as a bridge to talk about Barnabas, who was a bridge for Paul. Greatness isn't always where we think it should be. There's a type of person that history tends to forget, not because they're insignificant, but because they prefer to serve in the shadows while others shine in the spotlight. Okay? Barnabas was exactly that kind of person. Christianity would most likely be completely different without Barnabas's courage. Paul most likely would not have been accepted into the early church, and the gospel might never have reached the Gentiles with the impact that it did had it not been for Barnabas. Because while Jared talked about, everything that Paul was able to accomplish, when Paul spent those 3 years trying to basically change his image from terrorist, basically, to apostle, the last time the disciples had seen him was when he was holding the cloak when Stephen was getting stoned. So the next time they see him, the disciples want nothing to do with him. But the one person that stood up for Saul, now Paul, was Barnabas. And Barnabas literally took Paul by the hand, vouched for him, and basically worked over the fear, because that's what it was with the disciples, worked over the fear that the disciples had of who they thought Paul/Saul to them was.
Did the Holy Spirit come to Barnabas, and is that?
Yeah, that
that?
was part of the whole Pentecost movement. But during that 3 years, the disciples had no knowledge
Right.
of anything that happened with Paul. So the last time they saw Paul was when Stephen was stoned, when Stephen was martyred. So, and one thing that I didn't realize until I was doing the research for this project was that Barnabas wasn't originally named Barnabas. He was a Levite from Cyprus named Joseph. But the disciples changed his name to Barnabas, which means son of consolation and son of encouragement. And in the Jewish culture, names carry profound meaning. They reveal a person's character, his destiny, his essence. They were basically declaring to the world that this man has the gift of lifting up the fallen, of believing when everyone else gives up, of seeing potential where others only see ruins. So Barnabas was the bridge to, when you look at it, Barnabas was the bridge to Christianity, to the Gentiles. And when you think about it, Paul's upbringing he would have had nothing to do with Gentiles
Nothing.
because he was a Jew of Jews.
Yeah,
And-
it was a Jewish. It was against Jewish
Yeah.
law to touch or be in in any kind of community with Gentiles.
And part of his conversion, when he came, when the scales were lifted from his eyes and all of that, was that he was going to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. So in Acts chapter 11, when Jared talked about how Barnabas and Paul, they were friends, they were tight. There was so much persecution that the gospel was spreading everywhere, but they had to send someone to Antioch. And they chose to send Barnabas to Antioch because the gospel was spreading so fast, which was great, but it was spreading away from the Jews to the Gentiles. So they sent Barnabas to Antioch to verify that. He gets to Antioch and sees that, yes, indeed, it is getting away from the Jews, it's spreading to the Gentiles. And when he gets there, he commends the Gentiles, but he goes back and sends for Paul. So Paul comes to Antioch, so it's Paul and Barnabas and John Mark. But John Mark bailed halfway through the trip. And that's big because now Saul, Paul, and John Mark kind of have a falling out. So, which creates the tension between Barnabas and Paul. So they finish their trip to Antioch, thousands come to the Lord, Jew and Gentile alike. But the second missionary trip that they go out on, Barnabas wants to bring John Mark. But Paul wants no part of it. He's like, no, he bailed on us the first time, but you have to remember you have to remember Barnabas' character. Barnabas wants to lift people up. Barnabas looks at the person's character and says, no, this guy's worth saving. Like, it was a moment of, uncertainty in him. He wasn't sure, but I believe in John Mark. But it was so contentious between the two of them that Barnabas went one way, Paul went another, and Paul did not go with Barnabas. Barnabas took John Mark with him. But later, in the letter to Timothy, Paul asks Timothy to send John Mark with him. And that same John Mark ends up being the gospel Mark. So Barnabas has that heart to see second chances, he has the gift of lifting up the fallen, of believing when everyone else gives up, of seeing potential where others only see ruins. And that's what we're talking about with this whole mentoring thing. And like Jared said, and we talked about it at the first meeting, a Barnabas needs to be able to, be involved in someone's life enough to where you're not afraid to tell someone, look, man, I love you, but you're wrong. But you have to have that relationship where you can say that. You can't just call somebody out. You have to be able to lift somebody up when they need lifting up. You know, we talked about if you've got 3 or 4 friends that you could call no matter what, that's your Barnabas. So with that, I'll throw it to Jason with Timothy.
All right, so for Timothy, he was from, I'm going to butcher all these names, Lystra and modern day Turkey. His mother was Jewish, his father was Greek, so he was mixed, and so that mixed heritage helped when, you know, getting Jews and the Gentiles, connecting them.
However, again, somebody that Saul would have had nothing to do with.
Yep.
Yeah. And,
Saul wouldn't.
right, yeah. So Paul met Timothy during one of his missionary journeys in Acts 16. Timothy became a spiritual son to Paul. He traveled with Paul and helped spread the gospel across the Roman world. Paul trusted him deeply and sends him to strengthen churches, deliver messages, and deal with problems in congregations. And he became a leader in, let me say this one wrong too, Ephesus.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound right?
I'll buy that for $1.
Yeah.
Ephesus or Ephesus?
Ephesus.
Ephesus.
Ephesus, all right. He was a church leader there. One of the famous encouragements Paul gave him was, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young.
Mm-hmm.
1 Timothy. And some of Timothy's characteristics are his faithfulness, his humility, which you guys talked about, teachability, and courage despite his youth. I think they thought he was martyred, but they don't really know for a fact, I don't think. And so you may have some more things to add to it, but so some of my background, I'm a teacher and I was a coach for 17 years, and so as a coach, what I've noticed is when you're helping someone, you know, whether, you know, basketball or whatever, keep your elbow up and things like that, those pointers as you give the person the teaching or whatever it is you're doing, as you're helping that person though, you're definitely reinforcing yourself. And so I've noticed that in my just regular teaching as when I'm helping someone do something, it makes me a lot stronger in that same thing because it resonates with you as you go to do it the next time. You're thinking of how you taught that last person and you're going through those same steps. So not only is it great for the Timothy that you're pouring into, but the Barnabas and Paul's, you're reinforcing what you're teaching because as you say those words, you know, it's a reminder for yourself as well.
Yeah.
Very true.
I mean, repetition creates muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, the more you do something, the more it just plants it in your mind as much as it does the person that you're training to do it. So yeah, I agree with that for sure.
But it's like in this example, it's not lost on me that that Paul and Barnabas they were very close. And in fact, when they went out on these first trips, it was always Barnabas and Paul, listed in that order. Barnabas was the leader and then Paul. And then after a while it became Paul and Barnabas. Paul took over as the leader, and Barnabas had no problem with that. Barnabas was good with that.
Yeah.
And then when they split ways, it was Timothy that went with Paul. But after they split ways, because Paul didn't want John Mark to go with him, because John Mark had bailed on him on the first trip halfway through. But even though Paul didn't want any part of John Mark on that trip, he trusted Barnabas enough that on a further trip, he sent to Timothy a letter saying, send John Mark to me. And John Mark became the gospel Mark because he had that much faith and trust and Barnabas. And that's what I'm talking about in this mentoring relationship, that when you build that faith and trust in each other, whoever it is that you're pouring into, when they see that what you're doing matters, words can be empty, but your actions, what you're doing for that person, what you're doing with that person, when you drop whatever it is that you're doing because they have something that's more important, actions speak so much louder than words. And especially in a Christian environment, that is, I mean, you see it time and time again. Even in the parables, I mean, throughout the Bible, you see time and time again where actions speak so much louder than words.
Yeah. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable
100%.
as men, and that's a hard thing because you can't hold someone accountable and you can't encourage them if you don't really know what's going on in that person's life.
Yep.
If you just, hide behind the curtain and you're telling them everything's great, and then next thing you know, their life's falling apart, you're taken back by it because of that. And so, like the Bible says, is like you got to bring everything to the light, and you realize how big a problem that is if I can't be honest with you and tell you what I'm really struggling with, where I'm really at, and you can't help me if I'm not being honest with you. But that's that vulnerability. That's as I've come back to faith, that's one of the coolest, and I guess something I didn't really realize though is just stepping into a room with Christian men, how it makes you feel. Like I had my guard down, and for the longest time, like that's never been that way. As a man, you walk in and you're sizing each other up, and who's the big dog in here, and who do I got to try to impress, and what do I have to say to, what lies do I have to spin, and things like that. And so it's, like that burden you're talking about, you're carrying that around, and that's such a hard thing. And I don't think I realized that for so long. I didn't realize that was what being a man is. And so you find comfort in that, though, that vulnerability. It's scary, but it's also, there's that comfort of knowing that, you are your brother's keeper, but you gotta lay it out there and allow them to hold you accountable.
Well, yeah, because it allows them to see that you've walked that road that they could very well be on.
Yeah.
And that's where we're talking about how you may not always be Paul.
Yeah.
I may be Paul for that scenario, or you as Timothy being in the faith for a year and a half, 2 years. In any given situation, you could be Paul.
Yeah.
For sure.
So that role can change in any given situation. It's just who's been down that road, who has that knowledge base, who's walked that. So, but when you have that vulnerability that you're talking about, that's what's key in the whole mentorship process.
Yeah.
So here's what keeps what keeps just churning in my mind is, I think the idea of holding people accountable is not a problem for a lot of Christians. I think the problem is that a lot of Christians don't get the idea of relationship. They don't get the idea of when is it appropriate to hold somebody accountable. And that's something that I think that we want to, and that we need to cover here is, okay, maybe saying a lot of Christians is not being graceful enough about it, but I think that's where a lot of church hurt maybe comes in, because a lot of church hurt, I think, really comes not from the wrong things being said to somebody. I think a lot of church hurt comes from just biblical correction that people don't really like because they don't like to be told they're wrong. However, I know people from my past that don't really like to get in relationship with people and build and develop that friendship, but really like to tell people when they're wrong. And that's not what we're encouraging or suggesting by any means.
Yeah, I would say that's 180 degrees out from what we're talking about.
Yeah. I had a pastor at one point suggest to me, or in one of his sermons, but he said, my own paraphrase, but he basically said, if you don't know the name of someone's kids, or if you don't know somebody's address off the top of your head, basically if you don't know somebody intimately, you have no business correcting the things that they do or asking about the condition of their soul. And that's a big thing. I mean,
I don't know that I disagree with that.
It's one thing to have the conversation with somebody, maybe on the street, about, do you know Jesus? But it's another thing to walk up to somebody on the street and to tell them that lifestyle's going to send you to hell. Those are very different approaches. And for one, it's sharing the gospel. For the other, you really need an invitation for that.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by a lot of Christians have no problem with holding somebody accountable. The problem they have is all the groundwork they need to lay before they're invited to do that.
Yeah, I think
And that's what I think we're talking about here is you really need to be somebody's companion before you have the authority to speak into their life that way. And that's why church membership, church attendance, and getting into a men's group or getting into a house group or whatever the case. That's why groups like this are important. That's why this podcast might be a great thing for you to watch. But this ain't it.
No.
This is not the end game.
You need to be real careful about being holier than thou and pointing out everyone else's faults. I mean, let's not point out the speck in someone else's eye when you got a plank in your own. That's not what this is about, and that's a great point.
Yeah.
You're right. You do have to have that relationship with somebody before any of this works.
Yeah.
But what you'll find out is just like your relationship with Christ, this isn't about religion. This is about a relationship with somebody. And the deeper your relationship with somebody, the better this mentorship works. I mean, 100%. Like, I would have no issue whatsoever if either one of these two men checked me on anything because they've built into my life. It's that simple.
Yeah, you said it best when you said the actions speak. And I think that's what we're talking about with the mentorship. There's a huge difference between that and just spreading the word and things like that. You have to have that relationship. You have to have that history.
Yeah.
And whether it's Jesus or anything, like if you're not living the lifestyle that you're trying to correct people on, they're never gonna listen. You're a hypocrite. And so you have to build that by showing them, pouring into them and stuff, and then you'll see the things and you can do that. But yeah, I think the other thing with the church, the slippery part of it is the more you learn about God and the Bible and stuff like that, then you start to arm yourself with the knowledge, and then you become the holier. Well, I know that's wrong and that's wrong, and you miss the whole point of it, though. And I think that's where church goes wrong, where he gets a bad name, because you walk in and you feel worse leaving because the preacher hits you over the head with the Bible, and then everyone around you hits you over the head with it, and you don't want to go back because it's like you just walk out of there feeling terrible. You need that encouragement with the correction as well.
Yeah. I know I've walked into visit churches before, and of course beard, earrings, tattoos, and you get those looks from people like, how dare you enter my church? I mean, if you think that I am not a Christian, then the last thing on your mind should be, how dare you enter my church? The first thing on your mind should be,
Welcome.
come down to the front,
Yep.
right? Like, let's find you a seat
Yep.
right away. But we tend to get that it's for us and not you mentality as the big C church. And that's the totally wrong idea.
Yep.
And us four and no more idea, that is totally antithetical to what Jesus taught us. The last thing he said before he left was go and make disciples, not close the doors and hide inside. So
Hide it under a bushel.
yeah, it's not real sure how we got here, but I feel like it's a good place to be.
Yeah. All right. So to recap, what kind of brought us together was the mentorship, and that's kind of how we came about this podcast. And so, right now we're filling kind of roles of these people, but we're going to be pouring into each other's lives, hopefully,
Yeah.
and doing it on camera, which I think could be a cool thing to watch. And you're going to see three different people with three different experiences, three different knowledge depths, in the way that we come together and the questions that are going to be asked. And so we're always looking for, you guys at home, like what's going through your mind, what questions can we answer, as well as what we're going through. And so, that's kind of the premise of why this started, is just built on that mentorship, and we fit those three roles kind of, and that's how this kind of came about. And like I said, I had no expectations, nothing. It just, as soon as I heard it, I was all in. I was excited, and I'm excited to be around you guys and to have you guys pour into me, and hopefully, me maybe give you some of the young faith revelations, or just, strengthen y'all's faith by asking the questions maybe you had years ago that I'm now faced with today.
Yeah, I just want to be on record as saying that, like Jared said earlier, none of us have cut and dried answers. But everything that we will talk about will be biblically based. And we welcome any ideas for topics that you want to bounce off of us. But what we can promise you is that everything that we talk about will be straight out of the Bible. I mean, we've committed to each other to do that, and we make that commitment to you.
I want to be clear now, I know everything.
There's always the one.
No, I knew for a long time that I wanted to try to get a group of men together to do something on camera, something that we could produce on a regular basis and all that. I didn't really know what. And then that night came that we had the men's group that Brian talked about mentorship, and I mean, it just,
I think the Holy Spirit grabbed us all.
yeah, it's so solidified. And then, talked to these guys, and it was funny, I was talking to Jason, and when I did my pitch, and I didn't slow down long enough to let him talk, but at the end of it, he was like, I could have stopped you like 3 words in, except that I wasn't sure you were asking me.
Yeah.
He was like, I'm in. So yeah, both of these guys, same night, like 5-10 minutes worth of talking, and they're like, we're in. And we just knew this is something that, not just that we need, but that just in general is needed. There's a lot of preaching, not a lot of training, I think, in the world today. And training is necessary. Too many baby Christians, and we need to mature.
Amen.
That doesn't mean we can't have any fun. We want to have fun too, but we definitely need to mature and move forward in our faith and build disciples. That is the call. Build disciples. So that's the point.
100%.
And on that note, we're going to wait for you guys. We're not going to wait for you guys. We're going to come back next week. But if you guys have ideas, great. If not, we're going to bring our own. And
If not, you get what you get.
that's right. You get what you get, you don't throw a fit. That's what my little nieces used to say. But until next time, it's 3 Beards in the Bible.
Peace.